From his room, it was on the other end of the apartment, and he'd have to pass by the living room to get there. As he was walking past the sofa, he looked over and froze. The balcony door was open, and a cool breeze was hitting him as he had hoped. What he had not hoped for was to see people sitting on his sofa. Well, maybe not people, but things. There were around 3 to 4 figures sitting on his sofa. He could not make out what they looked like. They seemed to be blending in and out of the shadows, changing shape. What scared him more was that he could tell they were all looking at him. They didn't have visible eyes, but he could feel their stare on him. He contemplated running back to his room, but his bladder was strongly against that idea. Cursing, he shut his eyes tightly, ran to the washroom, did his business, and ran back, feeling the stares on him again as he ran past the sofa. He locked the door of his room, got in bed, and tried his best to go to sleep. When he woke up, it was morning and the skies were clear. He shakily went to the living room but saw nothing out of place. The balcony door was still open, letting bright light flood into the room. He never told my grandparents about his experiences, as he didn't want to make them worry. The only people close to him who know about this are my mom and me. You might think that he left the apartment soon after this happened, but he stayed there until he completed his undergraduate degree. He never had a repeat of that experience. He did, however, always close the balcony door at night from then on, with no exceptions. During his stay in the apartment after the event, he did some research into the history of the building but came up with nothing. The building had not been built on burial grounds. There weren't any records of murder-suicides or fatal accidents. This eventually made him chalk up the incident to a bad dream or some sort of hallucination. But I sometimes wonder if the thing he saw weren't just a figment of imagination. What if they were real? Hello once, my name is Kai, and I'm currently living in the Philippines. The incident I'm about to recount occurred 5 years ago, but it continues to haunt me to this day. It all began when I left on a 5-day trip to Bicol with my boyfriend and 5 friends. The first 3 days were fantastic as we explored various islands, visited tourist spots, savored chili ice cream, and even rode ATVs to see Mount Mayon. On the 4th night, we visited Albay and stayed at one of our friends' abandoned houses. The place seemed unthreatening except for the cockroaches that scurried about when our friends switched on the lights. The house was covered in dust due to being abandoned. To sleep, my friends and I decided to set up beds in the living room. Once we arranged our beds, my boyfriend, the 3 other guys, and I opted to have a drink while the 2 female friends had already fallen asleep in the living room. We were having a good time, engrossed in conversation, when suddenly my attention was drawn to a shadow on the wall. Shadows aren't typically attention-grabbing, but there was something peculiar about this one. It appeared darker than the rest. Intrigued, I nudged my friends, but the shadow remained motionless. One of them grew curious and asked, "What's wrong?" I pointed at the shadow and said, "Whose shadow is that?" It dawned on all of us that the shadow didn't belong to any of us, and we were all stunned. Even as we stood up, the shadow remained unmoving, and after 30 seconds, it simply vanished. My friends and I were unsure about what exactly had happened. Were we all intoxicated and having some kind of shared hallucination? However, that couldn't be correct since one of us hadn't even been drinking, and yet he witnessed the same thing we did. We decided to brush it off and try to go to sleep. I lay beside my already fast asleep boyfriend, but I simply couldn't sleep that night due to what had occurred. Despite knowing that we had to wake up early the next day, I forced myself to sleep. As I turned to face my boyfriend, I suddenly felt a poke on my back. I turned around and saw a man, possibly in his 30s, smiling at me. I was paralyzed with fear. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. He was also lying down looking at me. The terror overwhelmed me and I lost consciousness. I woke up the next day to my boyfriend shaking me gently. He urged me to get ready, or else we would miss the bus. When I shared what had happened to me the previous night with my boyfriend and friends, their expressions revealed their shock. They all mentioned hearing a man's laughter throughout the night. They said the laughter was so loud that it felt as if the person was in the same room as us. This happened when I was still a debt collector for a motorcycle company. I was assigned to a remote area, but this time it was a town frequented by tourists. Every day, I woke up at 5 a.m. and drove for 3 hours to reach the town where our branch was located. My routine was always the same. I visited clients, collected payments, reminded them of due dates, and handed over the money I collected to the office. I hated being in that branch. mostly because the cashier always took his sweet time with his paperwork, causing me to drive home late at night. Riding a motorcycle late at night isn't something anyone enjoys. The bugs flying into your face, you often get blinded by motorists with unnecessarily bright headlights. One day, I had to go home late again because the cashier had gone out with a friend, leaving his job unfinished as usual. I hated him every time he did that. After he finally returned and finished his work, he handed me the money needed to bring to the main office. It was already 9 p.m. I cursed under my breath as I started the long drive home. While driving along the pitch-dark winding road, my headlights suddenly flickered. "Ah crap, not now," I muttered. I stopped for a moment, tapping the headlight, and thankfully it stopped flickering. I continued driving, but as I navigated the dark road, I felt something swoop overhead. I looked up but didn't see anything. Just before I reached a sharp bend, something swooped down again, hitting my helmet and knocking me off, and at the same time my headlight went out. I slid and crashed on the side of the road. The darkness was so thick I could barely see a thing. I stood up, dusting myself off, and sat behind a tree. I waited for my eyes to adjust to the night. Thanks to the moonlight, I was able to see my motorcycle. But before I could move towards it, a large bird suddenly landed beside it. The bird was massive, about as big as me. It hopped around my motorcycle. I noticed that my helmet wasn't far from where I had crashed. I stayed hidden behind the tree, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. What kind of bird grows that big and flies after dark? It wasn't like any bird I'd ever seen. It had a head like a turkey, and its feathers were as black as the night itself. As it neared my helmet, my jaw dropped. It reached out to my helmet not with its feet or beak, but with what appeared to be a hand that came out from under its wing. I watched in terror as it picked up my helmet, only to drop it when it heard a car approaching. The bird flew away just before the car passed by. I took the opportunity to run to my motorcycle. I started it up, relieved that the light worked again, and rushed away, leaving my helmet behind in a panic. I kept looking around, scared the bird would swoop down on me again. When I reached the main office, I handed over the money to the manager who was standing outside the dormitories. He asked why I looked so dirty and why I wasn't wearing my helmet. I lied and told him it fell off, and I lost it. Before heading home, I spoke with the manager, requesting that he audit the branch I was assigned to make sure the cashier finished his work on time. I couldn't stand going home late every night. Thankfully, the manager agreed, and from there on out, I was able to leave at 5 p.m., avoiding any more late-night drives. Even so, I knew that I needed to get out of this job soon, but I hoped nothing bad would happen before I could finally make my escape. I have been watching a lot of your videos over the past few years, and I would love to share my story. My name is Raquel, and this happened to me several years ago when I was working in a call center. This incident took place in February 2016 at 3 in the morning. It was the end of my work week and I was excited to go home. When I got home, I quickly realized I had forgotten my phone in my locker. After resting a bit, I left my things and just brought my wallet with me to go back to the office. The travel time usually takes 1 to 2 hours during peak hours, but I was able to arrive at the office within 30 to 40 minutes. I got my phone and left quickly since I really wanted to get home quickly. I decided to take a cab or taxi. After a while, a cab stopped in front of me. The light inside was so dim, but I didn't think much of it. I always take the front seat when riding a taxi, but this time I'm not sure why, but I took the back seat. The taxi was driving for a few minutes and I was just looking out the window and trying to be comfy. I noticed though that he had started slowing down near the bridge over the Pig River. I looked at the driver and he was short and had short black curly hair. He suddenly stopped the car and pointed a gun at me. "This is a holdup," he said, and I couldn't believe it. "Are you serious?" was my immediate response. He started shouting and cursing at me while pointing the gun. I slowly took my phone out and gave it to him. He snatched it and turned it off. I really didn't know what to do. "Now give me your wallet," he shouted, still pointing the gun at me. I slowly gave him my wallet and he tried to grab it, but my hands wouldn't let go because I have important IDs in my wallet. My head was completely blank. My body acted for me and I pulled my wallet as hard as I could and opened the door and tried to get out. He then started driving and turned sharp to try to pull me back inside the car, but thankfully it did not work. The moment he stopped the car, I jumped out, ran, and started screaming for help. He shouted and drove in the opposite direction. I did not look back and just ran as fast as I could. I then saw a couple jogging and yelled for help. I told them what happened and a policeman came and brought me to the nearest police station. I told the policeman what happened and he said that the taxi I rode in had been stolen earlier that day and was reported as stolen by the real driver. The suspect's strategy was calling a taxi and then stealing it and pretending to be a taxi driver. After filing a police report, I stopped going to work that day and filed for resignation immediately. I also stopped riding in taxis for a couple of months and started looking for a job closer to my house. In April 2016, a friend from my previous workplace whose boyfriend is a policeman contacted me and said the holdupper was captured and asked me to check the news. I was shocked when I saw the news. My friend asked me to go to the police station to give my statement. I said no, but she strongly advised me to do it. She said if I give a statement it would add to that man's sentence, but I said that I wouldn't be able to because I was still suffering from the trauma of the incident and couldn't go outside. She respected my wishes and we said goodbye. I couldn't tell her back then that the man they caught was not the guy who robbed me. That whole situation made me realize that there are more people using the same strategy, targeting victims who work late and come home late. Though I'm now working from home, I just hope those who are still working outside will take extra precautions when taking a taxi.